Hey everyone, Yan Zhao back again. Was off last week, had to get some projects done, but I am back. Tonight we have Kris Faction. We're going to talk about Nano-13 and just a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Tomorrow night at 5 o'clock Eastern, special early show, we have Hero Darky Dark coming in to talk about his project, Relentlessly Bullied Hero number 1. And on Wednesday, I have Ed Jowett, owner, operator of Shades of Vengeance Tabletop Gaming. He is going to come on and talk about his new kaiju role-playing game. I'm not sure if you get to be a kaiju or if you're hunting the kaiju, but we're going to find out because it sounds awesome. Kris, thanks for coming.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Nano-13. Why don't you give us a quick rundown?
Basic premise is 3,000 years ago, aliens invaded Earth, enslaved mankind, and now there is a group of freedom fighters, former slaves that have gained some nanobot powers, and they are going to take the fight to the aliens and try to win their planet back.
Nice. So, one thing I'm always curious about in the indie movement, that let's say the post 2018 indie movement, it seems almost like there's a lot more sort of going back in terms of content. Like by the 1980s, most of what you see coming out of the mainstream is just capes and cowls. There's virtually nothing else. And I see a lot of people that are going back and doing horror, they're doing fantasy, and they're doing sci-fi. So what is it, about like a sci-fi subject that really got you interested as opposed to, like creating another superhero?
I mean, as much as I love Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and all of them, I didn't want to tell a story about a guy in tights or guys in tights. I'm an Army veteran, and I wanted tactical heroes. I grew up watching Battlestar Galactica, Star Wars, Space Above and Beyond, like just cool sci-fi, a lot of like military war action and things like that. And just the story as it was coming to me, it was always this kind of tactical, heroes fighting against some kind of big bad. My original idea was actually didn't have aliens in it. It was they were like government experiments, but that was like 20 years ago when I thought of it, and it just kind of evolved. And I think I'm a big sci-fi fan. I mean, Stargate and Farscape and all that stuff. So it was just kind of a natural progression for me, to write a sci-fi story.
Interesting. It's kind of interesting. Like things sort of come full circle. A lot of the shows you mentioned were, really classics, especially around like the 90s and in the early 2000s. And one thing that always kind of interested me is once you started getting into these more long form shows, like stuff in the 70s and 80s were more episodic. But once you get in the 90s, you start to get like Deep Space Nine, where they have these long story arcs, and a lot of them really they'll admit that they were influenced by Chris Claremont and his work on the X-Men. And so I'm kind of wondering, does it always come full circle? Like Chris Claremont and his X-Men really sort of lived their heydays through the 80s. Then it's like the mid to late 90s, you start to see this thing. Are we now back in that swing where you think a lot of that influence now comes back to comics and inspires a bunch of new authors?
I think so. Ultimately, I look at comic books as just the modern version of Homer's Odyssey, and
Mm,
and those ancient myths were very much these kind of long form stories. They were, many people had different versions and things like that, depending on where you live and which god you thought was the top dog or whatever. But I think really it just comes down to human storytelling, like just the way we tell stories. Eventually, I mean, episodic is good. I mean, there are plenty of one shots out there. There are some
mhm.
great shows. I'm a really big fan of like Lost in Space and Land of the Giants and things like that. And they were episodic, but there was always like, at the end you would have kind of the introduction to the next episode. And I think it's just kind of a natural progression of
Hmm.
storytelling because when when your mind creates a world, there's so many stories to tell within that world. So, why not just roll with it?
So in Nano 13, you're telling these stories of these freedom fighters trying to get their planet back. Is this something you could see where you'll have other books or storylines that branch off of this?
Yes, there is a plan for that. After issue 3 is when the stories start to branch off. I have 3 other titles in mind, and then
Oh,
I've also written a one shot that might end up turning into a two shot. Uh, yeah, because the world is very expansive. One of the things you'll see in the first book, it's not explicitly said, but the book takes place in Europe,
hmm,
and the Zzerus, the aliens,
mhm.
they use each continent for a specific purpose. And
Oh,
so, where our heroes are, the slaves there make small arms for the armies of the Zerus because they have this eternal enemy that they've been fighting for thousands of years way out in the cosmos. And those stories that are going to branch off are going to show what's going on in other continents.
oh, very cool. And so you mentioned it. You sort of conceived of this idea about 20 years ago.
Mhm.
What was it about this idea that sort of stuck with you? And even though it's sort of like changed a bit over the years, like what was that kernel that really inspired you?
I think life experience. So most of the characters are based off of people that I know, close friends, people that I grew up with, things like that. And then just life experience. Whenever I would go through something in my life, uh, if it was, especially if it was something that was, big change type thing, it always seemed to be, it would end up in the story,
Hmm.
in some way, shape, or form. And it just, life experience makes the characters more interesting because it makes them more personable, you know. And that's just kind of, that's how it evolved.
Hmm. All right, so let's bring it up here. We've got for anyone who is watching this now or at a later time, we've got the link to the Fund My Comic in both the chat and down below if you want to go find the book. But here we are for Nano 13. Um, so tell us a little bit about your crew.
Yeah, I've got Ron Masicki doing the art. I saw some work that he was doing on a book called Sector 7 that him and one of his
Hmm.
friends created, and I really liked his art style. I could tell that he was heavily influenced by Jim Lee and Liefeld, and I was like, man, this is the style that I like. And so after talking with him, and we decided, yep, you're the guy. He started working on the book, and he really, after reading the script, he really understood the world that I was building. He got the even things that weren't explicitly said in the script, like just the style, um, the landscapes, the architecture, and things like that. And I really let Ron kind of run wild. I'm not an artist, and so I don't pretend to tell an artist what is good or bad or whatever. I let them do their thing, and yeah, as you can see there in that double page spread, like I
Yeah, it
mean,
looks
Ron,
great.
yeah, he went to town on that. Um, and then I have Jay Brown on colors. Most people know him from GI Joe. Uh, but he's done all kinds of stuff, and he does a lot of stuff for indies. I know most recently it was announced that he was a colorist on Yaira for Ripaverse.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
I don't know if it was for the interiors or the cover, but it's one or the other, or
Still,
maybe both. But yeah, so he's out there helping indies,
mhm.
getting commissions and stuff. And then I have Mark Polton as my editor. Um, I'm a really big fan of Polton's storytelling. He
Yeah, he's
one
got some
thing
nice
that I
books.
oh yeah, yeah. One thing that I learned from him is keep the action up. Let's don't don't let it lull for too long. And I've taken that to heart in the storytelling. And I mean, I've gotten some great compliments from Jay Brown, who, like I said, known for GI Joe. He's like, I love this book because of the action. When the guy that did GI Joe says he likes it because of the action, like, you're like, all right. And then and Mark told me that this reminds him a lot of the Malibu Comics X Mutants
Oh,
comic book. So I took that as a big
interesting.
compliment as well.
Very cool. So, as a writer, how important was it for you to work with an editor?
I think that it is 100% a must, uh, because you may have a story, you may have a great idea, but once you start to put pen to paper, you can end up putting too much, too little, things like that. And an editor comes in and pulls the reins a little bit and lets hey, you're the storytelling, is it lulls here, or maybe it's a little too in your face right here, or whatever. And they really help you put your vision together in a format that everyone can read and enjoy. And being a first time comic book creator, I had no idea what I was doing. That was my that was my pitch to Mark. I was like, hey, I want to make a comic book. Here's the script. I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you help me out? And he was like, yeah. And then he gave me some great editor's notes. Um, and I took everything he said to heart. Uh, because I want to make a good book. you know.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, before you had Mark on the project, were you considering some other editors who were more in who come from like a prose world, from like novels and that kind of stuff?
Um, Not really. I
Hmm.
like only because I was already it was kind of Mark from the beginning.
Hmm.
I had him in mind because like I said, I really enjoy his storytelling style, and I felt like that fit what I was doing, and that he would keep me on the right path. And so far so good. I mean, he's enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. and
Yeah, when I was looking over the book and I saw Mark on there, I thought that was very interesting because a lot of people, when it's their first book, um, especially if they have some sort of a background in writing novels or short
Mhm,
stories or something, they'll get a literary editor, which is good. It's
mhm.
good for the story, but comics is primarily a visual medium, and I've
Yes.
seen a lot of books really suffer where the written story was decent, but they didn't have any sort of editor who could check what the artist was doing. And not to say that you would have problems with Ron or anything, but you always have to have the critical eye on both the art and the story.
Mhm.
And when you get somebody who comes from a literary world, they just don't have that experience, I find. So
Yeah.
a lot of books, solid story, but because it's the author's first book and the editor isn't from an art world, like a lot of stuff ends up slipping by.
Yeah, and I think I definitely noticed that in his notes because there was a few things where he was like, you know what, this would actually be better as a full page splash, or
Mhm.
hey, take this panel out. It's gonna make the story flow better. Or even there's one portion where he's like, you kind of having a little lull in the action, even though it only been like a page and a half, and
Mhm.
he's like, but I suggest doing this right here, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So Mercury Well says Marvel employed a lot of non-comic writers and their stories make for terrible comics. So I think it's the question of, do you want Marvel comics? Because that's how you get Marvel comics.
Right.
So then, as a writer, there are several different ways of writing a comic. Are you more the writing out the full script and then trying to do storyboards, or do you sort of storyboard it out and like you write on the paper like chunks of dialogue with arrows pointing to it, or
So
what's your
my
writing style like?
my writing style is that of an eccentric. I drive for a living. So a lot of times as I'm driving, I will just dictate my story into my phone.
Oh,
And then at the end of the day, when I come home, I start to parse it out, because, when you're dictating a story, a lot of times you may say some things that you're like, wait, that doesn't need to be until book three,
mhm.
or why am I explaining this? It doesn't make sense in this context or what. So yeah, like a lot of times I will dictate just into my phone while I'm driving, and then at the end of the day, I come home and then I just start going through it and I separate out whatever, and then I start to put it into a script format, and doing it panel by panel, and seeing where the action is. A lot of times, one of the things that I learned about writing comics is, you know, when when you when you put something like, this character walks up to this character. Well, it's
Mhm.
a comic book. They're not going to actually walk up to that character. So you break that down, into, they're on the other side of the room. And then, oh, he sees him coming. And then, okay, they meet and there's the dialogue there, and
Mhm.
sometimes you're even like, yeah, we're just gonna put the where they're hanging out and talking. Why put he walked over there?
Yeah, yeah. Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're the first person I've talked to that does dictation first. And it seems like that's a great way because you sort of pre-edit your own work.
Mhm.
Like you were saying, like, oh, what was I thinking? And just throw
Yeah.
that part out. And
Well, and when you drive for a living, like, I mean, sure, there's plenty of times when I'm jamming out or listening to podcasts or whatever. But when the story hits and you've got hours to think about it and mull it over and everything, I'm like, I mean, pretty much I was like, I'm tired of being quiet and thinking about this story. I need to turn it into words that I can look at and actually make it make sense. And that's really kind of how that started.
Hmm. And so tell me a little bit how you work with your artists. Is it some people will be like, look, this is what I got, this is what I wrote. Talk to the editor, I want it just like this. Or is there sort of like a back and forth between you and the penciler and the and even John with the colors?
It's actually I give them a lot of freedom. I mean, a whole lot of freedom, because I like the kind of ethos of John Romita Sr., where the artist is the final storyteller. And
Hmm.
I told Ron that from the beginning, and as he and I were just talking about the script and the story, and then even beyond that, the world that they're in, and I could tell that Ron was not only giving good feedback, but also just understanding the world, and even to the point that, I mean, his additions, you know talking about, well, what about, if we do it like this style or whatever. And then with the colorist, I mean, he was like, so what are you thinking color wise, because I'm thinking 90s sci-fi. And I was like, yes.
All right, so he caught on pretty quick.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Uh, so, what were some of the books that you were influenced by? Like, what did you grow up reading? I'm going to guess a lot of Liefeld and Jim Lee.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm a child in the 90s, so, obviously X-Men in the 90s
Hmm.
was king. Um uh, there all those there was a lot of really, really great stories going on in the 90s. I mean, you had, like, Death of Superman and Nightfall going on over at DC. Age of Apocalypse is one of my top X-Men story arcs. I absolutely love it. Um, I like the whole. I mean, just everything about it. I mean, even especially Gray Beast. I always like Gray Beast. But I've actually, even though I do read a lot of comics, I grew up as a big Star Wars fan, and I
Oh,
have read. Oh man, I don't know how many of the Star Wars books. A lot, a whole lot.
all the old EU stuff.
Yes, yes. I think I've only read maybe two of the Disney era stuff, and there's a reason why.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, that whole era for Star Wars, the books and the comics, the stuff Dark Horse was putting out,
Hmm.
and then all those EU books, it was so interesting to me because it was almost like George Lucas didn't care. Where except for like a few certain things that they weren't allowed to touch, like they weren't allowed to kill off any of the main characters,
Right.
at least until they killed Chewbacca, um, and things like that. They were pretty much free to go do whatever they want. Oh, you want to do a story about how Jedi came to be in the first place? Sure, why not?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and there's I like, it's always the old adage of George Lucas versus the fans.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole lot of continuity errors in that old stuff. But nobody actually cares, because as a whole, like, you can, sure, there were some stories that were pretty blah, you know,
Hmm.
and you were just like, well, I don't really care about that one. And, so whatever. I mean, there was a few times though that, like, I was like, wait a minute, that character is supposed to be dead. Or wait, how did they get there? They're supposed to be okay, whatever, you know. And then I don't know if you ever read the Coruscant Knights books, but
I don't think I read those.
they introduce these, they're called paladins. They're
Hmm.
they are an offshoot of the Jedi Order that use blasters and lightsabers. And I
Oh,
was like,
cool.
there's no way Lucas would ever sign off on that. But here it is, whatever. And they were cool
Yeah,
characters too. I was like, oh, this is neat. This is a whole new dynamic.
yeah. I don't know. There's like you need a certain amount of caring. Like you have to care about the original source material,
Hmm.
but you needed a certain amount of not caring by the higher ups so that people could really do what they want instead of like, if you look at modern Disney with their comics or even the Marvel movies, like
Hmm.
10 years ago when they started making Marvel, well, I guess it'd be 15 years now, when they started making those Marvel movies, they were all different.
Yeah.
Iron Man was different from Thor, was different from Captain America. And, but then, after Guardians of the Galaxy came out, like everything just sort of became very homogenized. And
Yeah. Yeah.
is Doctor Strange different from I don't know, Ant
Doctor
Man?
Strange and Iron Man are the same movie.
Yeah, it's the same movie basically. Well, even though not as good because the original Iron Man, they had him killing a bunch of people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I kind of forgot about that, and I watched it not too long ago. I was like, damn, this is like super gritty for the Marvel stuff.
Right. Right.
And that was the one that was before it got taken over by Marvel, I believe.
Hmm. Yeah, that was kind of like I guess from what I understand, the original thing was that they were just going to make these singular movies, and then the the little stingers at the end were actually just to tease the next movie. So it was like,
Hmm.
yes, it's in the same universe, but these are all standalone films. And then, well, of course, like you can't be making movies about characters that are going to be in the Avengers without making the Avengers.
Yeah. Like I read somewhere uh, right after the first Iron Man came out, and Sam Jackson says, "I want to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative." Like it was just supposed to be kind of a goof,
Yeah.
but then people freaked out and they loved it. They're like, "Oh, I guess we're
Hmm.
making Avengers now."
And I think a lot of people also forget that at that time, normies didn't understand that Disney owned these Marvel
Hmm.
properties and Fox owned these Marvel
Yeah,
properties. So, like, say when Winter Soldier came out, and there's the end credit scene where you get Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. There was a whole lot of people that were like, "That's Magneto's kids. There's going to be an X-Men crossover." But like I said, normies didn't realize. And I remember thinking, I was like, "Wait, I don't think they can do that." But that would be cool if they did, you know.
yeah. One day we'll get them one day. I don't know. Supposedly they're going to do some crossovers in Deadpool 3. We'll have to
Yeah.
see how that goes.
Yep. Yep. We'll see.
Uh, eh, I've been pretty disappointed with Disney. In some ways, I was happy with Endgame, and I enjoyed the Spider-Man movies after that. But otherwise, I just sort of pretend that they don't exist anymore.
Same. I'm
But
like the Marvel universe is now relegated to like the first like 3 movies and the Daredevil series.
yeah, I have a little bit of hope for the new Daredevil series, but
I
I
know,
don't
I
know.
know. I will say I did get a little more hope whenever they decided, hey, whatever this crap story they were talking about where, you know, Karen and Foggy were dead and all this, they threw that out, and now they have like a whole new writing team. And but some of the photos I've seen, I'm like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I was kind of encouraged. I watched Echo,
Mhm.
which was terrible,
Yep.
but the one scene that he was in, or that they had Daredevil in, Daredevil himself looked pretty cool.
Yeah.
Echo, not so much, but maybe they finally sort of learned their lesson. We don't want a She-Hulk walk of shame, Matt Murdock.
Right. 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 You know, and that's what, I mean, honestly, like like I have no, I'm a first time creator,
Hmm.
like I'm not thinking really that far ahead. But I always think like, what if someone came to me and said, "Hey, we want to option your story and make a TV show or movie," and I'd be like, I'd have to Todd McFarlane that. I'd be like, I have final say in all of it, like because you're not gonna destroy my story here.
Yeah, I mean, with Netflix, they've had a pretty spotty track record up
Hmm.
until recently, but with the One Piece show,
Yeah.
everybody loved that, and that was the one where the author, he was like, "Yeah, no, I have final say." And for
Hmm.
some reason, well, not for some reason. I mean, it sold like a
Right.
bajillion issues in sales, and the cartoon's been hot for 10 years. So, that I think that was the big difference, and hopefully, we can find some people in Hollywood who are allowed to make these shows without making horrible, horrible story and casting decisions.
Hmm. I mean, it's as simple as stick to the source material. I mean,
Hmm.
you don't even have to storyboard anything. It's already there. So,
Yep.
I'm like, man, there's so much work already done for you. Just I mean, look at was it Sin City, where
Hmm.
he said,
Yeah.
we don't even have a script. The book is the script. And they pretty much use the graphic novel as the storyboards, and the dialogue and everything, and kept it as true to form as they could. And then there was a second one, but oh.
Well, I mean, the first one, I don't know. Sometimes things just sort of fall in place
Mhm.
where normally they wouldn't work out nearly as good as they did. Luckily, Roberto Rodriguez, wait, Roberto Rodriguez? Was that a baseball player? Well, Rodriguez,
Yeah.
blanking on his first name, but he got Frank Miller to basically co-direct with him,
Yeah. No.
which, was, in my opinion, a lot of why it turned out as good as it did.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I would like to see a lot more of that kind of involvement, from
Hmm.
from the creators, standpoint, like, and directors in Hollywood saying, hey, look, you wrote this story. Um, I'd like to bring you in and, help guide us through, because I do understand the difference between a comic book and a movie. I know that there are
Yeah.
things that do have to be, changed or done differently, but if you have somebody that actually created some of that source material, oh man, how lucky are you, you know?
Yeah. Uh, I do know that with Netflix specifically, part of the problem is they don't give the people making the shows a lot of time and money. They generally tend to do it on the cheap. And you can see where that ended up with Iron Fist.
Oh yeah.
Out of the four shows, the one that they really, really needed to spend some time getting these people trained up in martial arts, and Finn Jones was just awful. Now I read later that he didn't give a shit about like
Yeah.
training at all, but and it showed. It definitely showed in the series.
It's just so crazy because like you have things like the first season of Altered Carbon, where
Yeah.
talk about big budget for a TV show. And if you're going to some Netflix executives or whatever and you're pitching Iron Fist, you would think like, hey guys, we're gonna need a really good budget for martial arts training. Um, you know, l- Special effects you don't really have to go too hard on with
Hmm.
Iron Fist unless you
No.
start getting into the Kunlun type stuff. But they weren't. It was a New York centered story. Make his fist glow and make him punch people and do some cool kung fu.
Yeah, and it's crazy that they couldn't get it because around the same time, Netflix had a show called The Wu Assassins,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that was it was infuriating for me to listen to, but the martial arts was amazing. It was like, movie level martial arts action on a basic cable budget. It was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
So like why couldn't they get some of those guys? And like, okay, Vince Jones did some, naked scenes in Game of Thrones, but like couldn't you find anyone else? Or this is the one time where it's like you could theoretically have race swap that character, just don't make him Danny Rand. Just
Right.
make him another guy from Kunlun who's the Iron Fist, who's in a fish out of water story. He could have been pretty much anything else. And, if you're like, well, we have to go to Hong Kong to get a guy who can do awesome kung fu, like, I would have been okay with that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the thing is, I mean, honestly, there's plenty of people in Hollywood that are
Yeah,
well trained. I mean,
absolutely.
I think part of it is they were like, we got the guy from Game of Thrones. This is going to be huge, and
Yeah.
then they just kind of left it at that. And it's like, wait a minute, he's got to be likable and know how to fight.
Well, that was the funny thing too, is what's the actress's name? Something Hedwig, who played the female in Danny Rand's girlfriend, basically.
Oh yeah.
So in the second season, she sort of becomes the Iron Fist, and at
Mhm.
that point, I was like, you know what? I'm fine with that. Simply
Sure.
because it's stupid, it doesn't make sense, but at least she put some effort into it and doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, well, and those shows teased like a lot of little side stuff, Daughters of the
Yeah.
Dragon and Heroes for Hire, I mean Misty Knight being in Luke Cage and everything. And I think a lot of people had a lot of hope for it. I totally understand the kind of, reorganization when Disney Plus
Yeah.
launched or whatever, like we all knew that was coming, but it was like, okay, well, now you have this specific time frame where you're not able to create these shows, until whatever contracts. I don't know how all that was behind the scenes, but if if I knew if I saw the success of those shows, or at least
Hmm.
Daredevil,
Yeah.
and know what all was teased, I'd get ahead of the game and I'd be like, hey, we need a writer's room
Yep.
and we need to know what we're doing by the time these properties are able to be made. Instead, it was like, okay, we're allowed to make them now. Should we make it like She-Hulk? Wait.
Yeah, it was sad. I mean, I know a lot of people didn't like Defenders. I thought Defenders was great overall.
I
It had
like,
some problems. It
sure.
had some problems, but it was pretty good. I would have loved to have seen Heroes for Hire. I
That would be
think,
great.
especially if you think about the time, what was going on with like, white privilege and like all these different social issues. Like you would have had two characters working it out and debating that kind of stuff
Hmm.
in a productive way.
Well, and why
But
in
they
the
didn't.
world this when they announced Punisher season 2,
Mhm.
and I was like, the best thing they can do in this climate right now, the political climate or whatever you want to call it, the best thing they can do is have the villain be hate monger.
Yes.
That would have been fantastic. Instead, season 2 was like two stories going on, and there was it was I was like, what is this train wreck? Because Bernthal
Yeah.
is an amazing Punisher. And season 1 I loved the whole like CIA conspiracy. I was like, yes, this is good and gritty, the Irish mob, and all this. And I thought for sure, I was like, man, for real, with the political climate going on right now, if you have hate monger as the villain,
Yeah.
that will draw viewers from every political aisle, from all facets, and it would be fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, I enjoyed Punisher season 1. I think the best version of him was in Daredevil season 2.
Yes.
He just seemed like the most Daredevil. But Punisher season 2, I I couldn't believe what I was watching half the time. Like, he lets a pedophile go? Like,
Yeah,
what?
I was like, "What?
What?
That's not Frank
No.
Castle at
No.
all." Like,
Um, and it's because, the girl he was watching out for, like, "Oh, no, don't be mean." Like, no, that would have been great to see, like, the emotional sort of, like, pairing, like, they kind of need each other, but they're
mhm.
really at odds. Uh, could have been great if
Yep,
they had a better
yep.
writer, but
Well, even in Jessica Jones, where
mhm.
they tease Nuke, and then he gets his neck snapped, and I was like, "Wait, what?" Like, wh- like, come on, man! You know,
Yeah, I really like Jessica Jones season 1,
oh yeah, yeah,
and
me
then
too.
it just kinda went downhill,
Hmm.
you
Yeah,
know?
really. I mean, season one, David Tennant made that season,
Yeah.
and I can understand it is really hard to top that, and as a fan of the Alias series, it's kind of the same. Like Jessica Jones after the whole Purple Man saga is already
Mhm.
kind of told. The comics get a little, like, eh, take it or leave it.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, well, hopefully. I enjoyed Werewolf by Night on Disney, so
I did
hope
too.
they've gotta have some people there who kinda know what they're doing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hopefully, they get a chance to, come out on top at some point.
I actually like the Guardians Christmas special too, but just because it's kind of a
Yes.
classic, like I could watch this every Christmas forever and enjoy it. It was done in a very Christmas special spirit, that
Yeah, and to me, that's what a lot of the Marvel movies are missing these
hmm
days, is, like, one of the great things, or even if we go into comics in the 70s, like, you had horror comics that were within the Marvel universe or the DC universe. And every once in a great while, you'd have someone from another section, like one of the superheroes come and interact with, Werewolf by Night or Tomb of
hmm
Dracula or something like that. But they were mostly separate. And I kind of miss that in the movies. Like, unfortunately Disney owns Marvel, but like there should be some real horror movies that are like R-rated,
oh yeah.
and maybe occasionally the characters might cross over, but you're not going to see like Tony Stark in a slasher, but it's in like its own little corner. And like they tried with Ant-Man 1, which I appreciated. It was a heist movie,
hmm
which was very different than a lot of the other stuff that was going on. And it just seems like even Spider-Man: Homecoming, it was like an '80s teen flick,
oh yeah, yeah.
But after that, everything just too homogenized. I wish that to get themselves out of sort of the jam that they're in, they would start going back to individual movies with individual characters that weren't so homogenized. Like I
hmm
was not a fan of Shang-Chi at all.
oh no.
Um, it should have been much like parts of it were a kung fu movie, and
hmm
like parts of it were okay, but then it was too much CGI, too much BS, rings and whatever. No, just make it. It should have been like more like Bruce Lee doing Game of Death or something, or
yep.
something a lot more like ground level. That
hmm
then somehow later ties people into the Avengers or whatever your center point is.
Yeah, that's what I mean. What made Marvel work in the beginning was Iron Man was an Iron Man movie.
Yep.
Thor was a Thor movie. Sure, you had Agent Coulson, this poor guy that is having to deal with all this. But I mean, he was the connective tissue that made you
Hmm.
realize, like, okay, these are all happening in the same world. But I like I I would love for there to be a Marvel horror division, because there's so much to play with there,
Yeah.
and you you don't ever have to touch on anything outside of that horror genre. I mean, you think about like all the Blade comics.
Yep.
How often did Blade actually, I mean, sure, there are plenty of crossovers, but Blade Tomb of Dracula, they really stood on their own, and same with like Werewolf by Night and
Hmm.
The Living Mummy and characters like that.
Man
Like they were,
Thing, and
yeah,
yeah,
Man Thing. These are stories that much like we felt like X-Men in the 90s.
yeah,
X-Men was almost like its own universe within the Marvel universe. Sometimes you'd forget that Captain America is just down the road, you know?
hmm,
And yeah, I think that's where success lies is whenever it's like, look, I don't I don't have to explain that the Hulk just rampaged down the road or whatever 8 blocks away while, Wolverine is in a bar fight.
yeah,
But they got to that point where it was like, okay, well, we have to address this happened, in this movie, in this next movie, or TV series or whatever. With I really liked Agents of Shield there in the beginning,
yeah,
and when the TV and movie studios split, and Agents of Shield was still like addressing what was going on in the movies, it ended up getting really bland because it was like, you guys are on your own mission. Like, whatever happened in Thor Dark World or whatever, who
hmm,
cares? But they were just trying to do it to get people to go see the movie. It's like, look,
sure,
they're if they like the first one and they know the second one's coming out, they're going to go see it. Now, then you watch Dark World and you're like, what'd you do to Malekith? What's going on here? Why is he flying a spaceship?
yeah. I don't know. It was kind of an interesting take what they were trying to do with Thor to make, instead of magic, make it
Yeah,
technology. But then
yeah.
eventually they gave up and they're like, "Ah, screw it, it's magic."
Well, it's one of those things where I was like, I know you guys are thinking about Doctor Strange, like
Hmm.
way back. So if you're sitting here saying, "Well, they're aliens and it's not magic," then you're kind of shooting yourselves in the foot, because eventually you're going to introduce Doctor Strange and then everybody's going to go, why was the Rainbow Road actually the Rainbow Road, instead of
Yeah.
the big machine or whatever, Einstein Rosen Bridge? Come on. No, I want it to be the ridiculous rainbow that goes across the cosmos.
Well, now that we fixed Marvel books,
Exactly.
let's go back to Nano for a second. So, uh, with the book, about how many pages do you think the book is going to end up being?
It's 42 pages of story.
All right. And like when, so before the show, we were talking a little bit about printers. When do you think you're going to have everything together and ready to ship out?
It. I talked to the printer today. The plan is to have it printed. It looks like about a week before the campaign ends.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So the book, it only has about a dozen pages left to letter. Everything
Oh,
else
okay.
is done. All of the art, all of the coloring. Is
Nice.
just lettering, and then have a Mark do one last little once over, and then it's good to go. So yeah,
Very
my
cool.
plan. I'm having a Critical Blast fulfill. If
Okay.
everything goes according to plan, the campaign ends on April 18th, and on April 21st, it will be it'll start being shipped out. So
Very nice.
now I'm keeping my fingers crossed on that. It could be a week after that, but definitely in a very, very short window.
Hmm. So you've got $1,157 so far, 77% of the funding,
Mhm.
and still 52 days to go. So it's most likely going to be a go for the book.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
anyone who's interested, this isn't going to be one of those, Kickstarter books where you're waiting 13 years for
yeah.
someone to fulfill.
No, and that is pretty much my promise. is anytime I start a campaign, um, the book will be 90% complete at the least. Because I do think it's important to be able to fulfill on a timely manner.
Mhm.
Um, and just yeah, I mean, when I order something and it's 18 months away, sometimes I forget, and sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, I spent all that money, and some of these campaigns that go on for, a year or whatever, and I'm like, I could have backed it last month instead of a year ago. Sure, I would have gotten it a little bit later, but so what? So yeah, it's super important to me to have the book as close to finished as I can. I mean, like I said, I won't even start a campaign until the book is at least 90%
Oh,
done. And I think when the campaign started, um, yeah, I think the first 15 pages were already lettered. And
oh
so,
wow.
yeah, and then there was only like 4 pages left to color, and they were colored wi- within like 3 or 4 days of the campaign starting.
Hmm. I'm kind of curious. Now, you said you don't like to wait forever for books, but was that the only reason that you chose to get a jump on it before you secured the funding via crowdfunding,
I,
or were there other reasons?
I think one thing was just a challenge to myself.
Mhm.
I'm uh, I wanted to be able to accomplish this on my own as much as I could. Because it's I don't know, it was just important to me to say, you know what, I'm going to commit to doing this, and I'm gonna see it through, and just like I don't want to say because of my own pride, because it's not necessarily that. It's my own sense of accomplishment of saying, hey, look, succeed or fail, I made my own comic book,
Hmm.
and I didn't, because the thing is like I said, I'm a first time creator. People could be like, nah, I'm not going to give this guy a chance.
Yeah.
And okay, well, I'm I'm going to give myself that chance. And I mean, if I could go back, I might have done things a little bit different. Like maybe not buy a house in the middle of trying to create a comic book.
Can make things a little tough.
But no, I'm very happy with where I'm at.
Hmm.
Not just where the book is at, but just me in general. I'm
Okay.
definitely
Yeah,
looking forward.
I'm just kind of curious because 5, 6 years ago, nobody had anything done. People were
Hmm.
funding campaigns on like 5 sketches, and that was about all it was, and people were giving money. But I was just kind of curious because as someone who's been talking to people, creators for a few years now, it seems like the mood of the customer has really shifted a lot to
Hmm.
where one, they really don't like the long delays, especially more than 12 months. And then it seems like they are expecting to at least see a lot more progress before, or like when you're starting a campaign. They
Hmm.
want to see a few pages. They want to see this and that.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the challenges.
Hmm.
Like I said, I mean, my standard is always going to be the book is 90% complete before I start the campaign. But and I want to be able to show the potential backers, uh, some good pages and everything. But I also don't want to give away too much of the story. I don't want to
Yeah. Yeah.
spoil things too much. I mean, notice I didn't put any lettering on the pictures, but I have shared the first 3 lettered pages on Twitter, and that's because it really is just kind of the synopsis of the story. All it is just narration, for the first 3 pages. And I didn't put it on the campaign because I kind of wanted it to be like kind of an Easter egg feel, of like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, if you follow him on Twitter, you can check out the first 3 lettered pages.
So with your, one thing that I did like about this too is that the campaign was fairly simple in
Hmm.
terms of like what levels you're offering. Some campaigns, it's like, wait, am I buying the book or am I buying a hat or what am I getting with
Right,
this?
right.
But this, it was nice and simple. I don't have to worry like I'm accidentally ordering the wrong cover or something. Um, so basically, you just have the two levels left, the two
Yep,
tiers, I guess you'd say.
yep, yep. You can either buy 1 comic or you can buy 6 comics for the price of 5. And
Nice.
that's and I like keeping it basic like that. I don't see myself doing variant covers unless I do second prints.
Hmm.
Just because I I understand it, but I think that one of the things that really kind of ruined mainstream comics was 5 million covers for whatever book. and
Yeah.
and it, like, if you end up with too many choices, then people just they're just like, cover A, you know. I mean, how many campaigns on Indiegogo have you seen where it's like cover A 300 copies, cover B 15, and
Yeah.
then there's C, D, and E, and you're like, okay, sure, if there's a big name connected to it, a lot of times those will end up being the top sellers, and that would be cool, but I'm a first time guy. I can't hire a big name to do a cover.
Yeah. Well, and for me too, I've always been curious. Like, first of all, one problem is when they do that, a lot of times the cover doesn't match the interiors, and that really ticks me off.
Hmm.
And the second thing is, it weirds me out when artists will when okay, so you're primarily on the writing side, but if
Hmm.
someone who's primarily on the art side makes a book, and then they have somebody else do the cover, like what? Why? What's wrong
Right,
with your work?
right,
Like
right.
if I want to get a certain if I'm buying a book because there's a certain artist, I want the cover that that artist did,
Hmm.
not somebody else. Even if we get Jim Lee or Will Sportatio in, I will say no, thank you, Jim. I'll stick with whoever
Well,
else.
and originally I had thought of doing multiple covers, and then just the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I just I don't think that that's the right path for me. Like, Ron is a really good artist. He drew a
Hmm.
really good cover. It encompasses everything that I think the story is. Sure, the cover has a little more detail than the interiors, but it's Ron's art, and
Hmm.
it's what you're going to get inside the book.
Yeah. So you mentioned before you've got plans for different offshoots. You've got, I'm going to guess you've got a sequel, a direct sequel planned. How many books a year do you think you're going to get up to? This is obviously your first one. There's a learning curve. Do
Yeah.
you think you're going to be able to get up to 2, 3 books a year, or
I
you plan on one a year?
I where I would like to be, the so the offshoot storylines, they're
Hmm.
going to be more traditional 24-page
Oh, okay.
stories.
Hmm.
Um, there's where I am, and there's where I'd like to be. I would like to get to the point where I'm releasing one title a quarter.
Wow, that's pretty
And
ambitious.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
very much
so so then sort of like one larger book like this one, and then
so. Hmm.
maybe like three of the traditional floppy size per year.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
the
that
plan.
seems pretty doable.
And then story wise, the main title um, goes on for 12 issues to
Wow.
complete this portion of the story, and then the side titles are as of now planned 6 issues apiece.
Okay, cool. So that's like around 500 pages of main storyline
Hmm.
and like another 120, 140 of side issues.
Yeah.
That's pretty ambitious.
Yes, very much so. But the world is just so there's so I'd like when I was writing issue number 5, and when I started to kind of wrap it up, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a whole lot that I really need to address, and where am I going to put that? Because it's not going to go in issue 6. Like it just doesn't.
Hmm.
It wouldn't fit there. And I was like, oh well, I do have this one shot that I've already written. Um, maybe that one shot should get a sequel because it does kind of, have to do with those characters and things like that. So, like I said, the story just it's ever expanding. I mean, I have I have a timeline written that goes all the way back to the destruction of Atlantis 13,000 years ago,
Oh,
and
wow.
there are Ron keeps telling me you need to tell people more about this. It's not spoilers, and I'm like, okay. There are things like, because this is an alternative history. Um, the Spartacus rebellion in
Hmm.
the Roman Republic. Well, in this timeline, the Zzerus were already in charge. So in in my timeline, uh, Spartacus and Glaber actually join forces, and they're crushed in about a month or so. But it's just like a little thing. Justinian this is kind of a big pivotal moment in the timeline, because when the Zzerus first invade, they're very much like the Romans.
Hmm.
They're like, look, you guys live your lives, but we're in charge. Don't cross us. And if we want to take you to make you work or whatever, okay. But
Hmm.
Justinian foments a human rebellion, and the Zzerus bring down the hammer, and that's the draconian, very extreme dystopian world that you see in the book, is because of that human uprising in like 531 AD.
Wow. So yeah, you really do have a lot of these side stories planned out.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and there's it's called Nano-13 because they're 13 nano-powered heroes. In the first book, um, the story focuses on the lead team of 4. But you're only going to see 11 of them. The other
Hmm.
2 are alluded to, but it's a mystery on where they are and what they're doing, and you'll have to get to issue 5 before you really see who those characters are.
Okay. So there's definitely, you got a plan, you know where things are going.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I even have to, I've got the titles for the side stories there. I'm not gonna write those stories because I could for sure, um, but I have them outlined. But I think bringing kind of a fresh mind to my sandbox will actually make it richer.
Nice. Uh, all right. So, Nano 13, anything else people should know about the book?
Um, it's my first book. I would really, really like you to check out the story. I welcome any critiques. As a first-time comic book creator, I really would like good critiques of it. So back it, read it, let me know what you think, and let me know how to get better for sure.
All right. Nice. Yeah. So, and again, for anyone who's interested, there is a pinned comment at the top of the chat. We've got a link to the Fund My Comic down below in the description. And also, there is a link to Chris's Twitter. Go follow him on Twitter. Get updates. You can go check out those 3 pages that he's put up already.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks for coming, Kris.
Thank you.
Appreciate having it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with Nano-13. Can't wait for it to come out.
Me too.
All right. So for anyone who is still watching, tomorrow night I have I've got Hero Darky Dark with Relentlessly Bullied Hero, and on Wednesday I've got Ed Jowett talking about a kaiju tabletop role-playing game.
That's so cool.
So yes, tomorrow is at 5 p.m. Eastern. Wednesday is at 6 p.m. Eastern. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you.